In this episode, we take a look at a recent claim coming out of Goldman Sachs that the ongoing AI boom we are living through did not actually produce economic growth in the US in 2025. Hello, welcome to the Call Like I See It podcast. I'm James Keys, and joining me today is a man who podcasts not just for himself, but for his whole tribe, Rob Richardson. Rob, I want to ask you, man, you ready to show us here on this show how you kick it?
Hey, I'm ready to disrupt and bring the thunder. Let's do it, brother.
All right. Now, before we get started, if you enjoy the show, I ask that you subscribe and like the show on YouTube or your podcast app. Doing so really helps the show out. And we're recording on March 24th, 2026. And Rob, Goldman Sachs recently released a pretty shocking report that outright asserts that despite all of the investment into and hype around AI tech thus far is not producing economic growth net-wise in the US in 2025. Now, we all know there's been, lots of investment, many would think that would suggest or that would lead to or that on the back end of that would come a lot of economic growth. So this analysis from Goldman Sachs is pretty shocking. And so them and some other people that have had some work into this, which I'll have in the show notes, suggests that we're a little over our skis with this investment in terms of actually delivering economic growth, which conceivably it would be for. So I want to ask you, what is your reaction and what context, do you think may be missing from this idea put forth by Goldman Sachs and their calculation? I mean, they're bankers, so they're doing this from a monetary standpoint, not necessarily to push an agenda. But what's your reaction to that AI has had zero impact on U.S. economic growth in 2025?
So when you think about the reaction that AI has zero economic impact, according to Goldman Sachs, they're thinking about it like bankers, straight up with the numbers. That probably has partial truth, we'll call it, right? Because it definitely, if you look at right now in terms of, if you're talking about how they're measuring it, right, in terms of like jobs created, how much actual capital was net returned to the U.S., that has a lot of truth. There's no getting around that now.
Yeah. Well, one thing, let me add to you real quick. Like, one of the things they point to is the fact that a lot of the chips being bought are from foreign manufacturers, right, which by definition would not be something that would go to U.S. growth. But go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, and so it's ironic. It depends on who we're talking about. Like if you go to Micro Center, they're making a lot of money because they're selling these computers that cost a lot of money. Believe me, I have one right in front of me that a year ago was $1,000 less, and it costs more because of the price of the memory, the RAM, and AI that's going through the roof. And so like, yes, it's not having this broad effect, right, in terms of where we're going to see all of this, where people are just creating all these jobs right now, and we're creating all this economic growth. Yeah. But on the other end, it's a double-edged sword. So in terms of like the regular person, the regular corporation, how they're seeing AI, they're not seeing this impact. And I'll talk more about that later. That's a separate issue in terms of why they're not seeing it. I think it's how they're applying it. But in terms of the overall macro issue, it's right now, it's people aren't seeing it because we are at the beginning stages. We are the equivalent, I can say this, we're at the stages that we were when people were just coming on and Microsoft was coming online in terms of where we are with AI.
Yeah. So we're like, it's just this is like the AOL dial-up phase.
That's right. We're in the AOL dial-up phase of AI. So, and there's a lot of infrastructure and costs that we're paying towards that. And so we could talk about whether that's justified, and I'll get to that. But bottom line is we're at the beginning of this. And so, yes, we're not seeing that impact because we literally just started like 2 seconds ago.
Yeah. No, the timing of this actually was very notable to me because that was my biggest reaction was like, well, hold on. Because it's two qualifiers in the statement. One is that in 2025, and then second being that it is it's U.S. growth. Now, that's not to say that if you take away those qualifiers, then there's all this growth that's being obscured by it. But when you do take a small, like what we're talking about here potentially is a large sea change in how business is done, how our economy works. In the same way, I mean, you look at the internet, and then people who were around and doing business before that, there was a big change in how the internet And
Yes.
all that came along with that, how that increased productivity, how that grew businesses. Amazon didn't exist before that, and now it's one of the best companies in the world, and so forth. So like how businesses came from that. And remember, there was a lot of false starts, and there was a bubble that burst all from that time before we got to the other end. So on its surface, I looked at this and said, this is very preliminary. But one thing you said that was really interesting to me, or that I kind of connected as well, was that part of the issue that we have is that, so the way AI can be used now to, in certain ways, to automate tasks or things like that to increase productivity, that's been happening a little bit, but I don't know that everybody necessarily knows how to do that yet that well. So a lot of it also is that we have these tools that are being developed, but that people don't necessarily know how to best deploy them and how to use them in a way to effectively increase the productivity in many ways. So I think that it's very preliminary. It's not a bad thing. You should take a temperature of these kind of things at all times, to see, okay, hey, a lot of money's going into this. There's a lot of people that are worried about it, a lot of people that are excited about it. So we should take periodic temperatures of it. But I think that context needs to be had, that I don't know that we're in the stage yet where we should be seeing a ton of growth from AI. Now, what that stage ends up looking like, we can get into later. But that to me is, a lot of what really jumped out.
Right. So there's two things I want to really hammer on that you just said. So the first part is really thinking about, you made a really good comparison to Amazon. I want to start there. Right. Amazon started during that period, and and that started during the period of the .com bubble. You and I are seasoned enough to have gone through enough of these cycles and bubbles. I'm not going to call myself old. I'm not going to claim that. But what I'm going to say is that, so we saw that. So let's take Amazon. It took Amazon, I think, nearly like 12 years to make any profit. So hold on that a minute. It took Uber years and years to make profit. And so there's a lot of commentary online because there are people that just like to be against AI just to be against AI. And some people are just for it and say it's going to cause, it's going to cure everything in the world. Like neither one are true.
Yeah.
And so
both of them actually aren't that helpful to listen to. The people that tell you everything is great, the people that tell you everything is bad. That's not where we're trafficking here.
But there's a saying that I know we often overestimate what we can do in 1 year and underestimate what we can do in 5 years. If you take that with AI, that is the genuine kind of point I want to emphasize. People are overemphasizing what could be done in 1 year, and they're underestimating, I think, drastically what's going to be done in 5 years.
Yeah.
Good point. The integration in terms of how people are using AI. So you're seeing real transformative impact. There are real companies that are making tons of money. Midjourney, Cursor. These are companies that don't have any more than 50 people, and they're making $200 or $300 million a year because they're AI native, which is a fancy way of saying they don't just use AI like 99% of us, which is just using it as advanced Google and helping us write a better email and just a basic thought partner. They're actually integrated into their everyday workflows, allowing people to do 20 or 30x more than they could, create more, build more, make more decisions. So that is real.
Well, let me add something to that real quick, and I'll kick it back to you, but because it's a very, 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 very important point. The native piece means that they didn't have systems in place prior to the deployment of the AI systems. So everything that they are trying to do, they conceived of the way they wanted to do it with AI in mind. And so it's much more direct to get from point A to point B when you're saying, I have a blank slate or relatively a blank slate, I'm trying to get from point A to point B, than it is when you have 20 years, 100 years or whatever of established ways that you go from point A to point B. You got staffing for that. You got all these things in place. And you have all this inertia, basically. And we have to change that stuff now to find, because there's potentially a better way, even if it's much better, to get from point A to point B. So being native to it offers a lot of advantages as far as the fast implementation. And really, again, you conceive of your processes with this stuff in mind, not trying to retrofit, to what it was or what it is now versus what you've done already.
That's exactly correct. So one of the problems organizations have is, so people are, we see organizations spending millions, billions, hundreds of millions. And what they're doing is they're trying to use AI thinking that it's going to solve all their problems. When your problems, it's not going to do that. AI is a enhancer and amplifier. AI will increase your chaos. If you have broken systems, it will amplify chaos. That's what it's going to do. So you still have to have things organized. You have to have a system. And then another problem, not surprising, a lot of these corporations and organizations are thinking that, oh, we're going to just be able to get AI, replace our people and do that. That might or may not be true in the future. But what I'm going to say is not true right now. Okay. And what's going to happen and what has happened and what you've seen happen is that organizations have implemented this technology and have not provided any type of workforce training, change management opportunities to teach people how to actually integrate it, to work with it. They say, here's a new tool and it's supposed to save you money. And we just spent millions of dollars. So you better use it. And so what do people do? They find bullshit reasons to see how they use AI, but didn't improve anything. Yes, we used AI more. What that doesn't mean anything, right? But you have to actually systematically approach work differently, integrate it, and teach people. Instead, corporations just think because they spent this, because some consultant they paid $10 million told them this is going to change your life. That's going to happen. It doesn't happen that way. In fact, the better way to put it this way, because you and I are both athletes, James. I tell people, actually with AI, here's the truth. You're going to get worse before you get better. So when you first start working out, you get sore, it's hard, and you're not better. That first month or two is really difficult. AI is the same thing. You're training new muscles, you're integrating new systems. And so people expect this instant result because you have AI. That's not true. So that's been the problem. How these organizations have approached it has been the problem. And these consultants have lied to them. And surprise, of course you don't see any change because you didn't implement any change. You didn't help. You didn't pay for your workforce to do it. You just say, we have these consultants that said this is going to change our world.
This will change everything. Yeah, no, I mean, and that's a big part of it, because where the benefit really would come is once people know how to use it. Because AI is about making decisions more efficiently. It's about going through information more efficiently, sorting out what's important, what's not. It can do a lot. A lot of repetitive things it can make happen in a snap. Now, there are concerns with this, though. Like you mentioned it a couple of times, and I actually want to hit this directly head on, because I often think that, I understand, from the business owner standpoint or from the capitalist standpoint, like, yes, this thing has the potential to make business run much more smoothly. But what I'm reminded of with that is the idea that, well, business owners and capitalists have been trying to come up with ways to replace workers since the beginning of capitalism, and so I wonder, though, because of that, and because of the types of things that AI promises, whether or not we're seeing another round of that more so than anything. So the increases in productivity, the growth that we're speaking of, is that actually more so the ability to either maintain productivity with less work or increase productivity with less workers, and then what does that really look like for the rest of us? So should the rest of us be so excited about the potentials of AI as the business owners are, so to speak? Because should the factory worker, on the assembly line, should that person have been as excited about the coming automation that came, when it came to building cars and so forth? And there are arguments that you'll get cheaper products if you can find work. Your things will be cheaper and so forth. But that's the conversation that we're not having as well, though, is what does success ultimately look like from a societal standpoint? What this growth that's promised? Because normally, when people go out of jobs, when there's economic principles on this, people go out of jobs, 1% increase in unemployment will drop GDP by 2%. Well, conceivably, that may no longer be the case if you're able to integrate tools that allow one worker to do what 100 workers can do. So when Jack Dorsey lays off thousands of people or whatever, then it's like, well, he's not doing that because he thinks it's going to drop his company's productivity. So that, though, would justify explosive growth in stock market valuation, explosive growth in investment. That would justify investment more so than it would justify maybe what the expectations of regular people would say. So that goes to the other side of, hey, you shouldn't be 100% up on AI, and you can't be 100% down on it. It's like it's going to change things in ways that we probably can't conceive of in a lot of ways. And one thing, I'll let you react to what I just said, but one thing I want to get to, though, is just I want to directly hit on the idea, like what Goldman Sachs is pointing out, and we've said, hey, this is early and things like that, but what type of things, and you may have already touched on it, so you can really reiterate, but what types of things do you think will reverse kind of the trend that we see right now, the year-long trend, where the level of expectation and investment isn't matching what's actually the growth being produced, at least in the United States?
All right. So there's a lot said there. So you said that during more questions.
Well, you can go back. You can go
Yes.
back if you'd like. But I do want, I want to get your take on the other piece as well.
Yeah. So let me go back, and then I'll take on like how we reverse the trend. So we discussed a lot about essentially, should the common worker be excited about what's happening with AI, or is this just going to the rich and those who are the business owners? The answer to that is if the average worker should be excited is a complicated one, because we have been going in this trend, at least in the United States, that we don't care about workers.
Man. That's the stock market. A company stock goes up when they lay off, when they're firing workers.
Right. So we have to. I think, especially with AI, get back to having a system where we actually value workers and people, not just as numbers and as a means to an end. I believe that fundamentally as a person and as a human being, and that's what we need to be as society. We're not there now. We value how can we drive the cost the lowest in the most efficient way, no matter what that looks like, to a point of extreme. Right. Yes. This is who we are right now. Right. This is the form of government and philosophy we have chosen, and it is just a fact. And people have been voting this way, no matter how bad it is for them. So this is where. So I think we're going to have to do a fundamental reexamination of that.
This is going to force that, because just real quick, the AI isn't necessarily your villain. The point is excellent. I just want to reiterate, the AI, the capability of AI isn't necessarily your villain here. If we're looking at people losing jobs, the villain here is the mentality as a society that we've been operating with. That then people are seeing the people who are at the top of that are looking at AI as an opportunity to go furthering what they've been trying to do already anyway. But the AI, again, as we've said many times, is just the tool in that sense.
Right. But let me get to but let me also then flip that. That I just told you my fundamental belief. My fundamental belief is that we should value workers more. We need to have a reexamination of how we work in this society, and AI is going to force that conversation even more. However,
hopefully.
However, I'm also right. This is the part I'm getting to next. However, us as individuals, everybody listening to the sound of my voice, you are literally cutting off your face, nose, arms, ears if you don't implement and learn how to use AI, from how to improve yourself as an individual, as a business. Because what I am certain of is that those who understand how to use AI and implement it and understand it will be better. They'll be better positioned than everybody else. And that knowledge is going to compound. I will 100% say this. Yeah. AI is a fast moving train, and it is moving its slowest right now. So every opportunity you have to learn, to engage, and to actually use the technology beyond just having a chat. It is not Google. Actually learning how to use it to be an agent for you, to help you, no matter what you do. If you're in social justice, there's a way to help you. If you're a lawyer, there's a way to help you. Learning how it can help you individually, learning how you can be better at your job. All those things are real, and you should be investing time and resources doing that, and just sitting down and building theirs, because you can't hope that people are going to see what's right, because that's for the movies, as we say all the time. Like, you're waiting for superheroes. They're probably not coming. So you need to figure out how to use AI to both help advance yourself and help those in your community around you.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very key point, because in the same way that when we saw even the internet and how a lot of the initial, what we see now is not what it was initially, even and I'm not even saying initially post .com bubble bursting, but what it did for many people is it leveled the playing field, actually, that smaller, individuals or smaller groups and companies were able to compete on a level with larger entities if they were able to use and leverage the technology of the internet effectively. It did wipe out, let's say, the mom and pop shop, like the local hardware store, that the big boys, where the Walmarts or whatever, were able to gobble them up. But people were able to spring up who were able to use the internet or maintain who use the internet and actually compete on a better level with the big boys. So it leveled the playing field to some degree. And then we kind of lost the rope on the antitrust thing, and things consolidated a lot more. But that again is a policy issue that we ran into
Yep.
more so than the tool itself. The tool itself didn't lead to greater consolidation. In fact, the tool itself actually allowed for some leveling of playing field. AI may be able to do the same thing. If one person can do the same, one person in a year can do what it takes 20 people to do right now. Well, that actually can level the playing field some. So again, it's not all doom and gloom. We should be very vigilant, because this is not necessarily something that the only way it's going to be deployed is going to be ways that help people. And all of the stuff we hear about, billionaires saying, yeah, we can make it so nobody has to work anymore. They didn't become billionaires by trying to make it so people didn't have to work anymore, except by firing them. So that's
you
how
really
they
believe that. Like, come on now, I got to bridge.
Yeah. Like, don't wait for the billionaire hero. Iron Man is not coming to come and put a universal basic income in your pocket. That's not how they got $1 billion. That's not how they plan to keep going up to a trillion.
James, I'm gonna say this: like Iron Man, as a fan of Iron Man and all that series, you're not gonna get Iron Man. You're gonna get Dr. Doom. So like, Robert Downey plays both of them. They look alike, but one has different intentions. Okay.
Well, no, for sure. I mean, to me, and just on what will, I think time reverses the trim, kind of what we were talking about before. Where AI, you start seeing growth, time. And more importantly, what comes with the time is more people learning how to leverage it to their advantage. And that's happening. We're on the early end of that now. People learning how to use AI agents, how to integrate them into what they're doing already, or to come up with new ways to do things or new things to do because of the expanded capability. That's where you'll start seeing the growth, when it actually can be deployed in ways that are more helpful. That said, like, I am concerned on whether or not that growth will be something that more in society can take advantage of versus less, because the people that are most motivated right now with this are the people that are looking at all the people that they could not have to pay anymore. And so our motivation needs to kind of match them in a way.
Wait, this is a really key point. If I can build on that, our motivation has to match theirs. If you want to, people with good intention and ability have to become builders in this space.
Yeah.
They have to become builders. So like it is literally the fight we have to be in. When you talk about what can you do to really make a difference here, we can use AI. There's so many applications we can use AI to help in ways that weren't possible before. And the good thing about AI, and it has lots of downsides, but it's a tool, it's a knowledge that's generally available to anybody that's willing to take the time to learn it. And it's not, I won't say it's easy, but it's the most accessible we've ever had any knowledge and information ever be, right?
Yeah.
So we can use it. I'll give just one clear example. Like, people have used it to be able to fight back medical bills that were used against them to say, like, when their loved one died, they put it through an AI and saw all these errors that came back on their medical bills, and they got their medical bills dropped by $60,000. And so what I'm afraid of, and what we're seeing happening, and I'll get to this a little more later, is that we will start seeing some type of policy and regulation seemingly look like it's there to protect people, but it's really there to make sure people can't use AI in the way that actually help them, right?
No, what I'm concerned about actually, there's a couple things in history. I'll go back hundreds of years, then I'll go back thousands of years. My big concern here is that the first hundreds of years, the enclosure period, in England, where something that was accessible to the public, which was land at that moment, once the idea of, broadly speaking, the ability to raise sheep and then sell wool in the international market, they closed off the land. Public lands became private lands, and landlords, the monarchy and then their people, basically exploited everything from the land and kicked the people out. And eventually the people, hundreds of years later, made it to factories and stuff like that. It's kind of the beginning of all this. But what's available and accessible to the public right now may not necessarily always be available and accessible to the public to improve their lives or to maintain their lives and so forth. So that I'm definitely worried about, especially because of the motives that are in play at the highest levels. And so, yes, right now, as we're helping build the knowledge base, they want us all to use it. But yeah, what happened but again, this is a policy concern. If we don't have people in government who are willing to look out for our best interests and not just try to rub our bellies and make us feel good about this or about that, then we have to worry, because those people then will allow these public tools to be cordoned off. The other thing real quick I wanted to mention is this actually reminds me the most, like, as far as how transformative it can be, but also how like the what it may end up being, the trade-off may end up being. I'm reminded of the book Sapiens, where it talks about the introduction of agriculture and the adoption of agriculture, and how actually, it's amazing. You can have more people in your family, more people in your village, more people. Like, it allowed for human populations to explode, but the quality of life for individuals actually got worse. Their teeth started falling out because of the foods they were eating. Their back started having back problems, started living shorter lives, and so forth. So, ultimately, what ended up happening with agriculture, in one way to look at it, is that instead of humans being free and taken from this plant or taken from this animal as they so pleased, they became servants of their plants or their animals. They're like, hey, I can't go anywhere. I got to tend to my corn. Hey, I can't go anywhere. I got to milk my cow. Like, they became servants of their crops or their livestock. I'm wondering now, like, we're doing all this with, where I'm going with this,
Yes.
where we're going to become servants of our computers, and where the computer will start thinking for themselves, or to some degree. So, again, just that's history. I look at history all the time, and I'm just like, okay, what does this remind me?
The point is well taken. So with history, in terms of will we be servants to technology, in some ways, we're already going down that path.
We're already there.
So we have to see that. So part of when we talk to, like, I recently taught a lot of teachers about implementing AI and implementing it safely. And the one thing that I talk to them about is, like, make sure as you are walking through, I tell this to parents with your kids, you need to have this, you need to be monitoring it, and you need to go and you need to make sure that you understand how it works. Like, it is not Google.
Yeah.
We tell them it's going to come back and say things that it feels like it knows you. It's talking to you. And kids have not, and some adults haven't formed the ability to have their own thoughts and understand how that works. But certainly kids are still developing that muscle of actually how to actually know what's right from wrong and how to think. And so when you have an AI that is talking to you as if it's a friend, because it's pattern predicting, we have to sit there and talk to our kids about that.
Yeah.
To say, no, this doesn't know you. This is math. This is how it works, right?
Yeah.
And then we have to make sure our kids
it's
are
all that
using
stuff. It's a compilation of millions and millions and millions of interactions and so forth, and it's playing off of that. And I wonder, and I want to ask. There's one more question I want to get to, but I wonder, as far as what will be lost, because something will be lost. Like, as we move into a society that's more dependent and more enabled by AI. Like, I worry about the expertise, particularly, that'll be lost. Like, a lot of the discussion now in terms of the types of things that AI can do right now for you. There's a lot of times it's entry level white collar stuff. And it's like, well, yes, that stuff is repetitive. That stuff is pattern. There's patterns you're trying to recognize, but that stuff is also training for people too. You're training AI, but you also can train people with that. And so I wonder what'll be lost if the opportunities for people to get that kind of training so they can become, an attorney, a high level attorney, or a high level anything, because they did all that boring menial work, their first couple of years in the thing. And we're like, oh, we can get rid of all that stuff. And it's like, well, maybe that stuff had a purpose that we might. So we'll see, but I wonder that. I've learned that with anything, most things in life, there are trade-offs. There are no free lunches or anything like that. There are trade-offs.
No solutions. There's only trade-offs.
You're the one who told me to read that. I think it was called Essentialism. That book.
So that's where you're quoting from.
Yeah, and I just it was like it's all about the trade-offs. And so, the last point I want to get to it. I know we don't have a bunch of time.
Let me just say this. I have something really important to say on that. When it comes to us training this current kind of entry-level upcoming workforce, we have to, this also goes back to higher education. Education itself has to reimagine what that looks like.
Yeah, that's true.
We have a model that's built from the Industrial Revolution, almost agricultural model. We now have to move from a model that integrates and works with computers and others and teaches our students and others how to come up with context, how to solve these problems earlier on, so they can learn that process as they go along. This should be happening in colleges, K through 12, and know how to integrate AI into helping them do those remedial tasks, but still learning that process. Because
I think you're right. Let me add, because the thing is that it's how to be able to operate in the new systems. But I don't know that we have the answer yet on how you can build the expertise. Like, that may be something, like you said, reimagine, like that we actually have to come up. Like, we need to be able to give people, to help people develop a certain level of expertise without being able to having the access or the opportunity to get paid to do a bunch of repetitive tasks that kind of lay the groundwork for you. So that is.
So my thought on that is very quickly to finish the thought is giving people the ability to critically think and get clarity of thought.
Yeah.
So because what AI is, I don't think it's ever going to do this. It's never going to be able to completely have judgment, taste, and context. That requires those things you're talking about because human beings and a machine is always going to think differently from a human. So we have to know how to critically think, bring pieces together, and be very clear about what we're trying to accomplish. And people will be surprised. It is very difficult to be clear. It takes a lot of work, and that's what we have to teach students and others how to solve problems, how to get clarity about what you're trying to achieve. And that's going to be the basis of all of our training.
Well, no, and that's the clarity and the communication oftentimes is where we've turned to, a lot of the best and brightest among us to try to look at what's going on and to be able to make sense and provide clarity to people about that. So yeah, that need hopefully will still be one that is and can be met by humans. But it's not necessarily a given. I mean, and this is, again, where you get into when a society decides what's important to them, because there are plenty of people that would prefer to offload that stuff, and so we'll see. I mean, we're at the beginning. I mean, and as we started at the beginning of this podcast, we're at the beginning of this stuff. And I like your message overall as far as how we need to take a very active role in engaging with it, because it's going to increasingly become more and more, be a part of more and more of our life. And right now, it's still all available to us. So the idea that this stuff, the curtain could be pulled at a certain point, and that's not here yet. So right now, let's try to learn as much about it as we can, improve ourselves, and then be prepared for however the next shoe drops, so to speak. So the last thing I want to get to you, and I know we don't have a bunch of time for this, but what we've also seen looking back at the growth piece and AI investment, not necessarily lining up with growth and so forth. There's one thing we've seen a lot of people throw out is that the reason that the growth we're lagging in growth is the fact that it's the tech space in general, or AI more in particularly, is so highly regulated in the U.S. And so they're saying that it's all this regulation that's holding back the ability to really unleash the AI and to really be able to pull fully leverage its benefits to create more growth. So I imagine your thoughts from the belly laugh that we got, but your thoughts on deregulation being what is standing in the way between growth from AI and or standing in the way from us getting economic growth in the U.S. from AI.
What AI regulation are they talking about? That was my first question. That's why I laugh. But if they're talking about the basic level of, there are some states that have some regulation around privacy, and that you can't just use everybody's information without disclosing it. Is that what they're talking about? So here's the thing: like when people tell me that we can't innovate because regulation is stopping us, so aren't we like the leaders in? At least we were in air aviation. We've been that, right, for a long time, and it's highly regulated.
Yeah.
Guess what? So these are false choices that are put in front of us because I think they don't want to have to comply with regulations.
They serve an agenda. They serve an agenda.
I think regulations are needed to answer the first question about how do we make the second question. We need regulation to also make sure we move forward economically. I believe that we need a framework to work from that's universal, that makes sure that people can have trust in this technology that's being used, and we can innovate. We need to have that. We need to know the rules of the road. Anthropic, as many folks know that are listening to me here, Anthropic was one of the central AI LLMs being used by the United States government. And recently, the current administration said that because it wouldn't agree to its terms, which, by the way, Anthropic is probably the best out of all these people in terms of having a basic frame, but that doesn't mean they're perfect, because they're still a multi-billion-dollar corporation. Their goal is to make money. But they at least have a scope in terms of what they will and will not do, and I respect that. They only had two conditions. One condition was that the AI would not be used to surveil U.S. citizens. Only U.S. citizens. It didn't say any other citizens, but that's another thing. Number two, that it wouldn't be used for autonomous weapons. Those were the two things. And allegedly, one of the targets during this Iran war used AI, and that was the target that killed the girls at that school.
The school,
right?
yeah.
So like what we're saying is like there's a reason like AI. There should be some things like 100% that should always have human intervention and decision making. So and
No, and that
decision should be one.
No, and I agree with you on that in the sense that at minimum, when you have that, then somebody's butt is on the line.
Yeah.
Like, and that's kind of what you're concerned about in these situations. A lot of times is the further it gets from a human decision, regardless of whether the AI is capable of making the decision, the further it gets from a human decision, the more plausible deniability people have, and nobody's responsible for something all of a sudden.
Yeah, and I don't agree with
we
that.
just can't live in a world where nobody's responsible for death. Where it's just happening.
Exactly.
And it's like, oh, well, what are we going to do?
But I'll say this, because James is an important point. With the AI, the decisions lie with the people, individuals in the company. So according to current US law, corporations are people. So if you're a person and you use AI, you as a person are responsible for its ultimate actions, period, hard stop, until that changes. That's what I think.
Well, yeah, but a corporation itself can't be put in jail. So, I mean, the idea that we're just going to will a corporation to make them a person by decree or of a court or whatever still falls into some realities that it just can't.
Well, I agree. I was being facetious.
But yeah, but nonetheless, I think that yes, this is agenda driven. Just the idea of, hey, we got to people who don't want regulation anyway are trying to bang this drum because again, the regulation is so minimal. You made that point very well. I'll add this though, because just for a full understanding of this, generally speaking, in newer industries, you do want to have a lighter hand with regulation because you would like the industry to explore some and figure out where the problem areas are and so forth. And then once you figure out the problem areas, then you can put the regulation on without necessarily stifling innovation. That's in theory. But there are still that doesn't necessarily mean that you need to have you can do whatever you want. The whole, like at the very beginning, we're at the beginning, we got to do whatever we want. There still has to be some level of common sense applied. And this is why we have a government, is to look and say, okay, what makes sense here? What serves the people? We're supposed to have a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. But again, if corporations are people, that kind of gets bastardized a little bit. But setting that part aside, the people, us, we have to we're supposed to have representatives that look and say, okay, does it serve Americans to have AI be able to surveil them, regardless of what the law says? And that is something that I think we would want our elected officials to say, no, we don't want that happening, or having, autonomous weapons going around and killing people, without it, like just autonomously, as the word says. Those are decisions that we want policy makers. We don't need to see AI driven weapons kill people in order to know that we don't want that to happen. So
no, that's exactly right.
Yeah. So the
AI driven things around like having conversations with our kids, sexualizing them. These things are
there are certain things that we can figure out without seeing the AI go too far. Like, hey, we don't want to do that.
Exactly.
So I thought you used a good term before with false choice, like in the sense that, yes, we don't want overly restrictive regulation on AI. We do want it to have some space, but people have been around long enough. We've lived long enough to say, hey, there's certain things that we don't want the AI doing under any circumstance. We don't want to go around just killing people. We're good. We're good on that one. So I think that, when we're presented with these false choices, and again, even if they're dressed up with the rationale and so forth, as I laid out, we have to be able to, again, see the big picture and say, okay, yeah, we're not stifling innovation by saying that, hey, the AI should not be surveilling us nonstop all the time when we have a Fourth Amendment that says that, like that shouldn't be happening, So yeah, I mean, I think it's one of those things that this is where the vested interests will try to lead people astray, and they'll succeed with leading many people astray. But where the rest of us will have to come together and realize that, hey, somebody's trying to make a monkey out of us, and be able to stand up to that through our elected officials, hopefully.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
So yeah, I think we can wrap this topic from there. But we did want to get into a conversation today, just that really was allow people to understand some of these issues. A lot of these issues are talked about at a high level, and obviously we didn't go in and break down everything at a granular level, but try to give more perspective on a lot of these discussions that are happening, or a lot of these, again, you'll see this headline, AI, zero economic growth, all that. And that's pretty shocking. So what's the context of that? Or what's the context of the deregulation and so forth? So Rob, I appreciate you joining me. Tunde's out today. Tell the people where they can find you, man.
Well, you can find me at disruptionnow.com. Of course, I have my own podcast at Disruption Now as well.
Yeah.
And I'll just tell folks as a final note, AI is neither going to be your savior nor your villain. We have to understand both we have to hold both its problems and its potentials at the same time. Because I see people, usually they operate on one extreme or the other. I can't tell you how many comments I've had to say AI is useless, don't do it, makes you dumber, and all these other things. Somebody said AI makes you dumber. I said, only if you're dumb. Like, you have to figure out a way to use it to help you increase versus.
I was going to say, if you use it correctly, it won't necessarily, but it can. If you become, just like anything, if you become dependent on it in ways that you could, but if you use it in a way, it can increase your capabilities and won't make you dumber. Right. If you use it another way, then it'll make you lazy.
Like anything else. And then we also understand, like when we talk about policy, there are two extremes of this. We do need an overall framework. What don't we want to leave in the hands of an AI agent, right? What has to happen? What is our relationship between workers and society? That's bigger than AI. That's a big one. That's a bigger one. That's bigger than AI. That's not an AI question. That's a who are we question. Yes. And one that I hope we answer better in the coming years. But as we look at regulation going forth, we also have to be careful of these individual states that may be well-meaning, that have harm too. There's a law in New York that is attempting to limit the ability to use AI to help people legally. And that's really just protecting lawyers. But people individually might need this to help them if they can't afford a lawyer. Mm-hmm. And so there are ways to do this that we can both help people and protect society, but we have to be mindful of it and really just be nimble in our mind. And because this is an opportunity right now, but if you're an individual, you're a person, you're a business, what I know is this for sure, you need to learn how to use it and help your business do it safely, learn it. But there's no disadvantage right now to moving forward. You're only disadvantaging yourself if you're not going to figure out how to implement it in a real way.
There you go. All right, so subscribe to the podcast, rate it, review it, tell us what you think, send it to a friend. Until next time, I'm James Keys.
And I'm Rob Richardson.
All right, and we'll talk to you soon.